Hope, hope.
Fans, we are back live on thehannibaltv.com with a very special edition of the Great North Wrestling Podcast. My name is Jack Kilby, Executive Vice President of Great North Wrestling, and I am very pleased today to welcome a legendary man from a legendary family in this business. He would be none other than Mr. Greg Gagne of the AWA fame. Greg, thanks for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Noah, for having me on. I almost missed it here. I was watching the golf tournament and I dozed off.
Well, it's a heck of a tournament from what I understand too. But we appreciate you taking some time away from that to discuss some of the salient aspects of your career. But before we get into specifics, I have to ask you just what it was like growing up in such a legendary household with your dad, who was a legendary athlete, especially in the state of Minnesota, and how that was for you as a child moving forward.
Did I lose you here, bud?
We lost your video, yes, for some reason. Still have your audio. Can you hear me? Okay, you're back. No problem. Did you hear
I'm doing this on my phone? I usually do it on my computer, so I hit the wrong button.
That's all good. That's all good. We're live. We'll roll with it. I just wanted to ask you about what it was like for you growing up in such a legendary household with your dad being the legend that he was and is, especially in Minnesota with his amateur credentials and, of course, the business.
Well, it started out, my dad started wrestling in 1949 and then went on the Dumont Network in 1950 and really became the big star on the national TV. And he was on every week. Lou Thez was the world champion. He would come in once in a while. You had Dick the Bruiser, Wilbur Snyder, Don Leo, Jonathan, Yukon Eric, Hardboiled Haggerty. Some names in the past, but all great professional wrestlers. And so once Vern, we got rolling, they sent him down. He wrestled in Minneapolis, his first match against Abe King Kong Cashy. And he wrestled about 18 minutes with him. He had a few of his buddies, Bud Grant, former Viking coach, played football with him at Minnesota, Billy Bye, and Jim Molosky and Harvey Solon. And they were all guys who played football with him at Minnesota, and they were in the front row. And Vern said, Cashy had Vern up against the ropes, and he hit him, and the guys jumped up, and Cashy leaned over, and he said, "Sit down, punks." And they all sat down. But the promoters thought he was too small, so they sent us to Tulsa, Oklahoma. And my dad had a trailer. My mom, dad, and I drove down to Tulsa, Oklahoma, and I was about 2 years old at the time. And he wrestled, the territory down there, and he became, the first week he was there, the light heavyweight champion. And I remember it vividly, even, way back. And I'm 75 now. But he'd come home from the matches, and across from where the trailer was a drive-in theater. And when he'd get home, I would wake up, and he'd put me on his shoulders, and we'd watch the movie. Couldn't hear it, but I'd sit on his shoulders and watch it. But those are the memories I have of back then. And after becoming the junior heavyweight champion, he only lasted about a year there, and they brought him back to Chicago and on the DuPont Network, where he became the U.S. champion. And him and Lou Thez had a number of fantastic matches. In fact, I was at the Herb Simmons Fan Fest down in St. Louis last night. In fact, Bob Orton was put into their Hall of Fame down there, and Randy Orton was there and did a great job. And we got a chance to talk about the old time because Bob Orton's dad wrestled my dad quite a bit. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And Vern used to say the two guys that really, when he got through with the match, you could see their laces in his rib cage from them kicking, was Hunt Schmidt and Bob Orton Sr.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty rough guys. So, those were my, memories back then. And Vern traveled a lot and got us a house in Minnesota. And we went from there.
Got an early fan question from Tony Smith, who wants to know who was the toughest wrestler you knew, and he mentions Harley Race or Brad Rheingans. I believe that's what he meant there.
Oh, the toughest? Well, Brad was a technician. Harley was unbelievable in the ring. But three guys that really was tough was King Kong Brody, Mad Dog Vachon, and Stan Hansen.
Mm-hmm.
Those are three that I remember Jim and I wrestled in Japan. We had a tag team tournament over there. And the teams were Giant Bubba and Dory Funk, Jumbo Tsuruta and Tenaru. And God, I forget who the other team was. And then Hansen and Brody. Oh yeah, Hansen, Brody, and then Jim and I, the 4 teams. And we wrestled the first week. First night, we wrestled Tsuruta and Tenaru, and we won that match in about 50 minutes. Next night we had Giant Bubba and Dory Funk Jr., who was the world heavyweight champion. We won that match in about 48 minutes. And then the third night we had Hansen and Brody.
Mm-hmm.
And that was an awakening.
Mm-hmm.
They were so established in Japan, and they had very limited rules over in Japan. And we're in the ring, and here comes Hansen and Brody, and all of a sudden I get hit with the chain, and Brunzel with the cowbell. Out of the ring we go, back into a wall, and hit us with fire extinguishers. We were cut up before the match even started, fought our way back to the ring, and we had a really rugged match with them. And finally we had a spot where Jim had taken Brody. He got a good drop kick on him, and he went down and he was coming up on his knees, and Brody kind of bear hugged him and held his arms in, and Jim got Hansen came in, threw Jim over the top rope, and then I looked up, and Brody, I'd come off the top rope with an elbow and dropped him to his knees, and he kind of bear hugged me with my arms trapped, and then Hansen came flying across the ring with that lariat, and that was the last thing I remembered in that match. So they won that one, and we met them. We won the rest of our matches. They were in the finals with us, and we won in the finals. But those 2 characters were unbelievable. And that Mad Dog Vachon, the most unpredictable man you've ever been around in your life. He was a mean son of a gun.
Mm-hmm. Was it always assumed that you would get into the business yourself growing up, or were you ever looking at doing something else?
I was looking to play pro football, and worked hard at it. I was a quarterback. Went to the University of Minnesota as a quarterback. First year there, Murray Wormuth had a little different philosophy. He didn't throw the ball much, and I was a good thrower. And we ran the ball a lot with big backs and big linemen, and I just didn't quite fit in that system. And I transferred where Wyoming had recruited me. Went out there where they threw the ball a lot. Finished my career out there. I came back, and I could have had a couple tryouts with teams in the NFL, but I told my dad, I said, I want to wrestle. He said, what makes you think you can wrestle? I said, well, we've been doing it our whole life. I mean, since I've been a little guy, I used to move the furniture around, and we'd go down and wrestle, all amateur style. So I learned a lot that way. In fact, in high school, my junior year, I was playing basketball with all my buddies, and the coach had called. He said, hey, I've got one spot open on the wrestling team. I had somebody injured. And I said, well, I told the basketball coach I'm going to go down and, try out for him. And he got a little hot about that. But I went down, and I pinned everybody, including the heavyweight. And I was about 162 pounds at the time. So he said, okay, you're on the team. You're going to wrestle in the 135-pound weight class. I said, I don't think I am. I went home and told my dad, and he said, there's no way. No, you can't cut that kind of weight. I was thin to begin with, and that would have just ruined me. But anyhow, so then I went on, and Vern had the training camp coming up. He had sponsored the 1972 Olympic wrestling team with Dan Gable on it. And we went to the Olympics, and he had also sponsored Ken Patera, who was the weightlifter. And Ken was going to turn pro wrestler after the Olympics. So we came back in September, and I told my dad I wanted to try out. And I got my partner, or a teammate of mine at Minnesota, Jim Brunzell. He was playing semi-pro football and not making any money. And I said, why don't you give wrestling a crack? He said, well, I don't know how to wrestle. I said, well, you're going to learn in this camp. And so we had Brunzell, myself, Patera. Another guy that we played football with in Minnesota, but never played much because he was a non-predictor, was Ric Flair. And we had the Iron Sheik, Khosrow Vaziri, who was on the Iranian Olympic team. And one of the coaches there asked Vern if he had trained him to be a pro. And in fact, my mom gave him the name, the Iron Sheik.
Oh, wow.
He was over at dinner one night. She said, you're the Iron Sheik. And that stuck to him. And then we had Bob Bruggers. Bob had been playing pro football, and he was a little bit older. It was a little harder for him. We'd go 6 days a week, 6 hours a day in an old barn with one light over it. And I'm sure a lot of people have heard that story. And, you know, it was the hardest thing we ever did in our life. But when we came out of there, Vern looked at us. He said, you guys don't have to be afraid of anybody in the business. Mm-hmm. And we really didn't understand that until they sent Jim and I to Atlanta one day. We were supposed to go down there for a couple of weeks, and we were going to wrestle Bob Orton Sr. and Dick Slater for their title. And we got down there, and in the locker room was a guy named Brute Bernard and his manager. So I went down, I sat down and introduced myself, and he turned to me and he said, your dad is a something sucker. I said, oh, yeah. I'm sure he felt the same way about you. And he looked at me. As he got up, him and his manager went in the other room, the locker room, and sat down. So I said to Jim, come on, let's go back in there with him. So we followed him in there, and I sat down and I said, Brute, do we have a problem? He says, no. But it was the respect that we got from coming out of Vern's camp, because, I mean, a whole last hour we did submission wrestling. And with him and Billy Robinson teaching us, holds that nobody in the business really knew. But when you clamped it on, they knew they were in trouble.
Mm-hmm. Here's another question from a fan I was going to ask you about anyway. Tony wants to know about thoughts on the passing of Ole Anderson. I know he always spoke very highly of Vern, but Tony's asking, was he as mean as everyone says?
Yes, he was. It was funny because when he was training, my dad would bring him over to the house after, and he'd have dinner with us, and he always drank a lot of milk. And my mom, there was 4 of us in the family, had this big gallon or 3-gallon milk in the refrigerator, and it had a little hose that came out. And Ollie would drink about half of that gallon, or 2, or whatever it was, 3 gallons of milk. So we had dinner one day, and Vern's talking to Ollie, and he said, God damn it, Ollie, you're not doing this and that and that. He says, sure, my kid can, and I was 12, 13 years old. He said, he can drop kick you. No, bullshit. And I drop kicked him. But, over the years, my father trained 144 wrestlers. And Ollie was one, Gene Anderson, Lars Anderson, Blackjack Mulligan, Blackjack Lanza, Ricky Steamboat, Ric Flair, Sergeant Slaughter. I saw him yesterday. He's still talking about the camp. I mean, everybody that came out of that camp always talks about it, because it's like a fraternity. If you've made it through that, you can make it through anything. So but Ollie was just a phenomenal. I got along with him great. My dad trained him, and he was always good to our family, but he was a mean guy.
Did you intersect with him when the AWA shut down and you went to work as an agent in WCW in the early 90s? Was he booking at that time? Or
When I got there, they had just let him go and Bill Watts was in charge. And Bill and my dad were good friends, and I fit in there good with Bill. And it was funny because we were in the office one day and we're booking events, and he started complaining about something. So he said, "Man, they got this new job, executive producer." I said, "Well, should I go down and apply for it?" Nah, it doesn't mean anything. They have Tony Schiavone, Jim Ross, Eric Bischoff, who I got him a job at WCW, and some other guy, Joe Pedicino, I think was his name. And all of a sudden, Mike Graham was working with me at the time, and the two of us, we drove to the town for the shooting, and it was somewhere in South Carolina. And Bill Watts showed up that night, and he said, "Well, guys, I got fired today. Your new boss is Eric Bischoff."
mm-hmm.
I said, "You got to be kidding. Eric doesn't know diddly about wrestling. He was only an announcer for us. He was selling ninja suits when he came to our office, and we happened to get stuck for an announcer because Vince had sold all our announcers the day before we were doing interviews. So anyhow, that's how he got in the business and became an executive producer. And, I guess he did a pretty good job for him.
Yeah, absolutely. Wanted to ask you about the whole concept with a fan actually emailed this to me, wanted me to ask you about the whole weasel suit thing and your memories of working with Bobby the Brain Heenan.
Bobby Heenan was the greatest manager ever in professional wrestling because he could not only do it outside the ring and on the mic, but in the ring. He was phenomenal. But he had been a thorn in our butts. We were the high flyers in wrestling, Bachmichael and Stevens and Patterson, and any combination you want. And Heenan was always there. And Jim came up with the name Weasel and called him that on an interview one day, and it kind of stuck. So later on, Heenan, I think it screwed up a match that I was in with Nick Bachmichael. And Wally Carbo, we were sitting there, and I said, "Wally, why don't you put me in a match with Bobby Heenan, a weasel suit?" He said, "What's a weasel suit?" And I said, "I don't have any idea, but I know what a weasel looks like. And you must have a guy that can make some kind of a suit with a tail on it that looks like a weasel." So he came up with it. I got it. So we got Heenan in that weasel suit, and it was phenomenal. The match was, I had to beat him within 10 minutes. If I beat him, he wore the suit. If he beat me or I lasted more than 10 minutes, then I had to wear it. And I beat him at about 9:58.
And he used to speak of that as one of the highlights of his career. And even when it was resurrected in the WWF with Warrior, he always would say that it was best done with yourself.
Yeah, he was. It was a fan attraction, and it really fit him well.
Some of the younger fans that aren't as conversant with wrestling history may not realize that the real Hulkamania concept, of course, started in the AWA, and I got a lot of questions about why it was dispelling, fact from fiction about why Vern didn't put the belt on him, and there were some of the famous, I don't want to say dusty finishes, but apparently finishes where he won. And then another fan is asking here, coincidentally enough, is it true that your dad was trying to set your sister up with Hogan to keep him in the territory? He noted that in his book. I've never heard that before.
No, I never heard it either. I didn't know about it. My sister didn't know about it. So I don't think so. I don't think that ever happened. I was in New York wrestling on a card, and I wrestled Johnny Rodz that night. And we had a heck of a match, and I came out of the ring, and Vince McMahon Sr. said to me, "What was that?" And I said, "That was a wrestling match." He said, "Well, how are my guys going to follow it?" And I said, "Well, that's their problem." And I had seen Hulk there, and then I went back for another time, and he was really struggling. And he was thinking, I'm going to hang it up. And I said, well, why don't you come to Minneapolis in the AWA? I said, we got all the greatest talent in the world, and let Vern work with you, and we'll all work with you. And I went back and told my dad about him and gave Hulk the number. We never heard from him for about 7 months. And then finally he got a call, and he came in, and his first match was in Milwaukee, but he didn't do very good interviews. And Vern was good at helping guys with their interviews. And they put Johnny Valiant with him as a manager. So we went to Milwaukee, and the place is sold out. And Hulk's, I don't know, maybe on the third match that night. And Johnny Valiant's his manager. And, he was trying to be a bad guy on his interviews with Valiant. And I back home, I said, geez, hey, the people love this guy. No matter who you have with him, he could be a great star that way. So what we did is we put him in tag team matches with Jim and myself, a lot of matches with us, so he could get the flow of a match. And that we would tag in when we had control of the opponent and say, drop a leg, grab the arm, tag out, whatever body part we had been working. And then he'd start to get the flow of it. And then we got to Chicago, and we're in the Rosemont Horizon, sold out. And it's the three of us against Bockwinkel, Stevens, and Jerry Blackwell. And we got in the ring, and Hulk came in, and he gave that pose of his. And I said, Jim, grab his T-shirt. So we grabbed the T-shirt, and we tore it off real slow. And those people went like that. And I think that was the day that Hulkamania started. It started prior to that, but that's when it went wild. And he got the feel for it. And why he didn't get the title? Mm-hmm. There's a story that goes with that, but he wasn't ready at the time to carry a title. He wasn't quite there yet. But we had a deal with CBS had come to us, and Vern and I had to sign an agreement, non-disclosure agreement. And that was 1983, April. They wanted Bockwinkel and Hogan in a title match. And we couldn't say anything about it. We didn't tell Hogan about it or anybody else, because we had this non-disclosure. And then was it December of 82? That's when McMahon grabbed him. We had a battle royal in Phoenix, Arizona, and him and Andre were going to Japan, and Hogan was Vince was on the plane with him, signed him to a contract. He came back. We had all Christmas week sold out. We had him in 6-man tag team matches, and he didn't show. And I called him up. I said, what are you doing? He said, well, I signed a deal with Vince. I said, that isn't the way you do business. So you have no problem. You just tell Vern, hey, I'm leaving, but you fulfill your commitments. That was the only guy that ever did that. Needed that after when Vince went after him was Bobby Heenan. He finished all his commitments before he left and told Vern up front. Otherwise everybody, they'd pick him off and they would go. So Hogan, if he'd have waited, gone April, there was probably a pretty good chance he'd have been the champion then. And we'd have probably had a pretty good deal with CBS then after that.
Mm. A lot of wrestling historians point to the fact that the AWA was a very mighty organization, a great place to work in terms of payoffs and schedule, etc. But really was the major victim of, as you've already sort of alluded to, Vince's national expansion with the talent raids, etc. that happened. At what point did your father think this guy's really serious about putting me out of business?
I don't think Vern ever came to that conclusion. Vern was pretty good with the talent. Vern was a family guy, and he gave our talent the whole month of May off in the first 2 weeks of June. And then in the summertime, we only ran 3 or 4 shows a week. So everybody was home with their families. And then from September 1st to the end of April was our big run. But we had all the great talent there, and we were the biggest territory. We were from Winnipeg to St. Louis to the West Coast. McMahon had the big cities on the East Coast, but he didn't have the, where we were going and what we were doing. And with ESPN coming on, which, Hogan missed that opportunity too. It would have been, if we'd have kept it together, it would have been great. But Vince came and met with us one day after he had taken some of our talent, and he wanted to buy Vern out. That's what he said. He said, I'd like to, buy the AWA. And well, Vern said, I've got, partners in Winnipeg and Denver and Chicago and San Francisco, St. Louis. He said, I just can't. I got to confer with them. He never made an offer. That's all he said. We drove him to the airport. He said, thanks a lot. Great meeting. Got out, walked. He stopped it before he got in the door, and he turned around and he yelled out, I don't negotiate. And Vern said, what did he say? He said, I don't negotiate. What did he mean by that? I said, I don't know what he meant. That's what he said. Who knows? He never threw an offer to us or anything. Vern just said, let me get hold of my partners and then we'll get back to you. And then after that, all of a sudden, Hogan and then this guy and that guy, and then our announcers. And, he would do it at times where really would burn us, That's how Eric Bischoff ended up being an announcer for us. He had taken our announcer the night before we're doing all our interviews for all our markets. And our production manager grabbed Bischoff. He had to be in the office that day, trying to sell ninja suits and doing commercials. And so he worked with him for 2 days. And next thing you know, he's our announcer. That's how he got into the business. But no, I think McMahon knew if he could take the talent that he had in the AWA and burn the biggest territory, he would have it pretty well under control.
Mm-hmm. One fan is asking here about who was the best payoff promoter. I'm not sure whether he's referring to that you worked for or just in general in the past.
In general, Vern was known as the best payoff, and he paid 33.5% of the net to the talent, with the main event getting the most, and then so on and so forth. And everybody, that's why they worked there. That's why we had, we only had 18 or 20 guys, but they were all main eventers from the opening match to the top. And everybody wanted to work there because of the time off, the family time they had, and the kind of money they were making. I mean, we're working, 240 years or days out of the year, maybe 230. The other guys are working 350 and doing twice on Saturday and Sunday. And, and our guys are making as much money as they are. Mm-hmm. So it was known as, Vern being the best payoff man in the business. Ah, shoot.
Oh, we lost you again.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No problem.
Please check your email. Now I got to check my email for a.
No, it's the same link.
It won't let me log in.
Just click the. I'll put you out, and then we'll click the same link again.
All right.
Just like you did before.
Okay.
Well, fans, we'll be back with Greg in a sec. He's doing the interview on his phone, and this sometimes happens when a person gets a call or a text, I think. So we'll just give it a second, and hopefully he'll be back. Great interview so far. Very fascinating. I haven't even scratched the surface, actually. If you have any questions still, we're compiling them here, and we will be asking as many of them as we can, hopefully before we lose the time. But we're having a pretty open-ended schedule for this interview. Just wanted to shout out John Gonzalez here, who says, "Jump in, Jack Kilby." That would be me. And yes, we're going to ask some Iron Sheik stories. Fizzy, he did talk a little bit about Eric Bischoff, as you may have seen, but we'll definitely ask that one again. And he's back.
Sorry.
Right on. No problem, sir. This is live, so these things happen, and our fans are quite interested in what we're talking about here. I wanted to ask you about a lot of the fans up here in Canada, first, myself included, aside from magazine coverage, got to experience the AWA via the ESPN contract and those tapings at the Showboat Sports Pavilion in Las Vegas that we saw so many great matches, Henning against Bockwinkel, that 1 hour draw, and of course the program with the Midnight Rockers against Summers and
Rose.
Yes, and Rose. Just wanted to ask you about how the Showboat was, first of all, how the contract came together and how the Showboat was chosen and that whole process there.
When we were wrestling in California and we were wrestling in Colorado and Salt Lake City, and Vern just went to Las Vegas to, do the TV show to actually run the arenas, and the Showboat made us a great offer. And about the same time, ESPN came on, and we said, "Well, why don't we just shoot it out of ESPN out of Las Vegas?" So it worked out really good for us. In Canada, they got what was it? It's ESPN, but what do you call it up there? CSN,
TSN, the Sports
TSN.
Network.
Well, and you also got the matches from Winnipeg, didn't you? On that?
Yes, on TSN. So yeah,
they would tape them in Winnipeg. We wrestled there, once a month on Thursdays. They would tape them, and then they would play them across Canada too. So I mean, the AWA, when you look at it across Canada, and then from, Winnipeg to St. Louis to the West Coast, it's a pretty big territory.
Mm-hmm. And definitely some good programming there. Were you the person that put the booking and the creative together for those tapings?
We Vern, myself, El DeRusha, Wally Carbo, and then eventually we had Ray Stevens and Jack Lanza and Nick Bockwinkel come in, Bobby Heenan once in a while. Those were the guys that then did the booking.
One of the characters that came to prominence during those Showboat tapings, and he's kind of developed a sort of a cult following, if you will, is the announcer Larry Nelson, the late Larry Nelson. Do you have any stories about Larry? I heard he could really hang in the partying department.
You hit it right on the head there. There's not much more to say. After the matches at the Showboat, he would he'd have a good time. He was a great guy, though, just fantastic.
Did he towards the end of the AWA? There's some confusion as to what happened to him. Did he walk out, or was he being scouted by New York too?
I actually don't remember. I wish I did, but I don't. He was so good, but he never ended up in New York. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. They may have just made him an offer and then put him on the shelf just to kill us. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's the way Mr. McMahon, Vince McMahon, liked to work. Mm-hmm. Not a good guy. And Larry was a good guy, but not Vince.
Yes, for sure. In terms of the Pro Wrestling USA concept, wanted to ask you that about how that came together, and there seems to be, depending on whose account you read or whatnot, the fact that it didn't work due to infighting or heat between Crockett and Vern, and was it true that Crockett was trying to steal AWA talent too?
Oh, yeah, he did do that. We had a big match in Chicago. USA came together, and Vern brought all the promoters together, from all around that were still fighting McMahon. And the agreement was, and they would all have a say in who was going to be on the card and where we're going to go and what we're going to, the whole thing. And we had a big match in Chicago in Comiskey Park, and the Crockett's were involved there with us. And during the matches, the Crockett's were going around in the locker room and trying to sign our talent. So they had this vision that they were going to compete against McMahon and they were going to take over the country. And, you know, I don't know, just kind of backfired a little bit on everybody. But they couldn't hold it together because they couldn't agree on anything. You know, the problem was they should have had, they didn't have one guy in control because nobody wanted anybody to have control. They all wanted control. Mm. And at first it was rolling pretty good and we had some momentum going. And then, you know, when all that went down and everything else, it's just, you know, you couldn't work with anybody. You know, Watts had his ideas, Vern had his ideas, the Crockett's had theirs. You know, all the other promoters that were involved, they had their idea and who they wanted going in there. And it was too bad that, you know, if they would have just all voted on one person to make the final decision, you know, and that's the way Vern did his booking. You know, he would listen, but let everybody bounce off ideas and then he'd make the final decision. And we all agreed on it. But there we couldn't get that done. And it was unfortunate because I think if we could have probably given him a run.
Yeah, you had a couple of really big stadium shows, including that one in Chicago that you're talking about. Mm-hmm. In terms of your the whole position with WCW, a fan is asking about what you think of Eric Bischoff denying that Greg got Hogan into WCW.
Here's how the story went down. Bischoff asked me, he said, there's my alarm clock. He asked me, how do we change this thing around? I said, the only way is to get Hulk Hogan. Well, I don't know Hulk Hogan's number. I can't get a hold of him. I said, well, I do. And I will give him a call, but here's the deal. I will get him here for you, or at least you can have a meeting with him. But if you sign him to a contract, I want a little percentage of everything he does. I mean, that's only fair. Mm-hmm. Okay. I said, well, get it in writing from Bill Shaw, and I'll get Hogan. So a week went by, and they'd send home on Fridays, and I'd be home for the weekend. And came back. This went on for about 2 weeks with Eric. And I said, get the contract, Eric? We'll get Hogan. I said, get the contract. I'll sign it and we'll get it going. And I came back on a Monday morning and I walked in the office and there was a big banner, welcome Hulk Hogan. And I went into Bischoff. I said, what the hell happened? Well, Bill Shaw and him flew down to his house, found somebody gave him I don't know if it was Flair or who gave him the address or how to get a hold of Hulk, but they did, and they went down and signed him. And I got Bischoff wasn't in the office that week. I went home. I get a call on the Friday night. He says, hey, you don't have to come back. I said, what do you mean I have to come back? You're done. You're fired. And I told my wife right there, I said, I'm flying down there Monday, and I probably won't be able to come back because I'm going to throw him out that window on the 14th floor. And I went there and he never showed up for the 2 days I was there. So that was the end of it. Yeah. Mm. So he was the big hero. He made everything happen. Not so. Mm-mm. That is the real story. No matter what that little liar says.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. A fan wants to know about I guess about Rick Martel as the champion and his run as the champion in the company.
Well, Rick was a great athlete. I mean, a great wrestler. He had the looks and everything, and he carried the belt well. I'm sorry.
Oh, you're back.
One of my sons is trying to get a hold of me. Anyhow, Rick did a good job. Mm-hmm. And he was my son. He was good for the company.
Were you surprised to see what New York did with him and the whole model deal and that gimmick?
Yeah. I didn't. Vince has a different philosophy than we had. Vern was a wrestler, and when you came to the AWA, you had to be able to wrestle. If you couldn't, you're not going to make it there. Mm-hmm. You just won't. And Vince, their whole style out there. I always give this example. Vern used to be trade talent with Vince Sr. When Billy Superstar Graham was here, he was finishing up in, say, 6 months. So Vern would call Vince and he said, we'll send you up Billy Graham. So they'd go up and he'd do TV for 6 months up there. Go in once a week, do the TV and come back to the AWA. And then when he hit New York after he left the AWA, they had him right in a match with Bruno, and sold out. So we would send him that talent. It would build that championship match for him. So he would send talent back to us. And the biggest difference between the AWA and the WWF at that time was their style was a lot of punching and kicking. The AWA, you had to be able to wrestle. You had to be able to counter holds, get into holds, get out of holds. And it was storytelling from wrestling. Theirs was all built around a character and punching and kicking. So they sent Pedro Morales into us after he lost the title. Now you think main event guy. He never made it over the third card or the third match in the AWA. The people just did not accept that style. They would accept it from the Crusher and Mad Dog, but a guy like Pedro, it just didn't work there. They wanted a guy that could, wrestle. Mm-hmm. And that was the biggest difference between the two organizations. In the AWA, you had to be able to wrestle.
A fan also wanted to ask about another thing that's become a fan favorite and stuff of lore, and that's the whole Wrestle Rock Rumble, and that video that is found on YouTube and still very popular with the fans, and how that whole concept came together.
Well, we had this big event we were putting on, and we called it. We weren't going to call it WrestleMania. We were calling it Wrestle something. And an ad agency in Minneapolis said, why don't you call it Wrestle Rock? Bring in a rock star along with it. Well, we couldn't get any rock stars booked in time to get who would they get in there? Country Western guy. I can't remember who it was.
Charlie Daniels?
No. He was staying with Willie Nelson quite a bit. Oh, Waylon Jennings?
Okay.
Somebody like that. And
Haggard.
Yeah. So they came in and that's what we had. But they promoted it and they made all these little things with the Wrestle Rock Rumble, So that's how that came about. This ad agency in Minneapolis came up with the idea.
The whole concept, again, another fan question of Rambo, Greg Gagne, that comes up quite a bit. Wanted to get your take on that situation.
It's probably the biggest mistake I ever made, but Slaughter was looking for a partner and he'd done something with somebody in Charlotte and they thought I'd be a good fit for it, and probably wasn't. Should we leave it at that?
Memorable.
Yeah. I mean, he put me through the drills and that, but he needed a lesser wrestler in there with him. He could have taken a Kenny J or a George Kadaski and done just as well with it. It would have been more of against a tag team where a lesser guy in there would have meant a lot more, I think, than what I did.
Mm-hmm. The AWA saw one of the first, if not the first, national exposure of Paul Heyman as Paulie Dangerously as a manager of Adrian Adonis in the original Midnight Express. Wanted to know your memories of working with him and thoughts on his Hall of Fame induction this past year.
Well, first, he did a great job on his. I even congratulated him. I sent him a text message. He did a phenomenal job, and he turned out to be, he is as good a talker as Bobby Heenan, and he's an antagonist, and he's a guy that you want to hate. He's got the look and everything. When he came to us, he was really young in the business, but he still did a good job as a manager, and he built up to now where he's he's the best out there right now that they've got.
Mm-hmm.
But all in all, and then that Hall of Fame speech he made was fantastic, and I think only he could do that.
Did he have when he was in the AWA? Did you have to give him much direction, or was he fairly confident in where he was going?
No, he wasn't. He was still green, so he'd cut an interview, and then he'd probably go back, and Vern would have him do it over.
Okay, you're back.
Got everything going here on this damn phone.
That's okay.
Anyhow, what were you, Paul Dangerously?
Yes, Paul Heyman.
Is that we were talking about the he was green. He needed help, but Vern would always help people with their interviews, and that's where he was good. Let's turn it this way a little bit. But he had the arrogance about him, and he sometimes he wouldn't listen, sometimes he would. But he's done it. He came a long ways, and he's a Bobby Heenan type when it comes to the mouth. But Bobby had the ring wear too that Paul doesn't. He's the kind of guy you'd like to get him in the ring and kick the crap out of him, but he just can't do that in the ring, which like Bobby Heenan did. But as far as the mouth and representing Roman Reigns and that whole crew, yeah, there's nobody better than him.
Mm-hmm. In one of the, I wanted to ask you about.
I lost your.
Can you hear me now? You got me? Nope. Well, we've lost Greg for a second. We'll hopefully get him back quickly. Please continue to send your questions. We're going to ask as many of them as we can in the time that permits. Again, this is live, so these sort of these things happen when somebody's doing their interview on the phone. I'm going to ask Greg a couple of questions about tag team wrestling in this segment. Hopefully, there he is back again.
Yeah, sorry, guys.
No worries, sir. Wanted to ask you generally about tag team wrestling. You were a tag team specialist, and just your thoughts on the decline of tag team wrestling in the modern era from that golden period. And then one question specifically about the Road Warriors and whether they changed the finish on Vern as they claim they did. That's a lot of ground to cover. Sorry.
I don't know about which match are they talking about that they changed. I don't remember.
Bruiser and Crusher.
I don't know. I don't remember. I remember the match, but I don't remember them changing anything. They may have, Bruiser and Crusher were near the end, and they were. I don't know if the Road Warriors were taking advantage of them or what, but anyhow, they were a new breed coming into professional wrestling, and they were a couple of horses. And they started with Ollie Anderson, and Ollie told them just knock the crap out of everybody. And because they couldn't wrestle, but they knocked the crap out of everybody. Mm-hmm. So they kind of, I don't want to say they changed tag team wrestling. Tag team wrestling, I think, changed though. It's an art with tag team wrestling. It really is. And God, some of the people that we wrestled was just amazing who we learned from. When you're in with guys like Nick Bockwinkel and Pat Patterson and Ray Stevens, and Jerry Blackwell, and even Hanson and Brody, you learn from them. We wrestled the Road Warriors a few times. We didn't have really great matches with them. Because they wanted to do what they wanted to do. I remember one night in Winnipeg, we were in a cage match, and it was getting out of hand. And I finally we we got Joe down, Laurinaitis, Animal, and put the Indian Deathlock on him with the legs.
Mm-hmm.
And his legs were so big, I got thin legs, but I had it locked in. And he said, "Let me out of here. Let me out of here. I'm going to kill you." And he sat up and I slapped him as hard as I could. And I said, "You're not going anywhere. I'm going to break your freaking leg." And his legs were so big and it was so tight, I didn't have to put much pressure on it.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of slowed the match down a little bit and let them know that, we're not going to be pushovers. But that's what you had to do. You had to go in and be ready for a fight. And, what helped us is because we knew how to wrestle, and we were able to control them a little bit.
Do you think that tag team wrestling as such a big attraction in the 80s and into the 90s? Obviously, we don't have that focus anymore in the business. Do you think, given how entertaining and engrossing tag team wrestling can be when done properly, do you ever see that making a return to a form of prominence?
Boy, I don't know. I don't see him concentrating on it. We had two champions. We had the world champion and the world tag team champions. And that's the way a lot of the territories had it at that time. But like in the WWE, they had some talent up there and they had tag teams. But I think the style that we had in the AWA and the tag teams we had brought it whole to another level. And the Crockett's came in one time and studied our TV and that, and they took our format back, and they had great tag teams there too. You had Ricky Steamboat and Blood. Is that his
Jay
name?
Youngblood?
Yeah, Jay Young. Yeah, and you had great teams back then. And tag team wrestling is really, it's an art. It really is, and it's a different environment. But I know in a couple matches, and I say it all the time when we've had some of these matches with Patterson and Stevens and Bachman. We had a match in Denver, Colorado, and Patterson had been out for a while and came back, and we were wrestling him and Ray, and they had Bobby Heenan in their corner, and it was what they called a cold main event. They hadn't been around in a while. We sold the building out. We were really hot in Denver. And we had a match with them, and they had a top wrist lock on us. They didn't throw a punch. They didn't throw a kick. They didn't eye gouge us. Didn't pull our hair. And we had in 8 minutes, we'd fight out of it, and Bobby Heenan might get up on the apron, and they'd pull us down. Maybe they'd pull us down by the tights or by the hair. And we couldn't get out of that hold. 8 minutes, we had a full-fledged riot. People coming in trying to save us. There was never a punch or kick thrown in the match. Just a top wrist lock. That's what professional wrestling was to us. When you can get the people like that, you've really grabbed them and got that feeling for them. And it was just the adrenaline would go through you. It was unbelievable. But we had great people to do that with. They were artists at it. They were great, and we learned from the best. And we had what they used to call, we could sell really well, and we had a lot of fire on our comebacks, and we would blow it out. And that's what a lot of people have told us why they liked being in the ring with us. And I'm not trying to brag about it. I mean, if you want to know the reasons why, that was it. We just really gelled together and learned from the best.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make any sense to you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, people have pointed to McMahon taking, for whatever reason, taking the emphasis off tag team wrestling as a major reason for its decline. Out of, I'm not sure why, economics or one of his whims. Do you see that as an accurate
Probably.
indicator?
Well, he's very smart at building individuals and personalities and characters, and sell merchandise. And he, I don't know what his thought is of why he would eliminate it, unless you don't have a lot of people that can do it well.
Mm-hmm.
But their whole philosophy is, big, strong guys, 240 and up. And, the WWE, to me, I mean, they're hands down the best thing on the market. And they've got great talent. And those guys are performing. And I actually sent a text to Triple H the other night after I watched that match with Randy Orton and AJ Styles.
Mm.
That was an old school wrestling match, and those people responded to it. They got emotionally involved in it. And that's, to us, what wrestling was all about, getting those people emotionally involved in your personality. They're going to like you or they're not going to like you. But you have to, and Vern would teach us in the camp, he said, now, what you have to do, guys, is you have to be who you really are inside. Don't try to be somebody else. Be who you are. If you feel something, let your emotions go. Don't hold back, and don't try to be, big, strong guy or this or that. Just be who you really are. And even on your interviews, talk from the heart. And that's what I've always taught my guys too. And I think Vince has lost that part of it. You're seeing with Triple H running it now, and probably The Rock helping out, they're getting back to a little more storytelling in the ring.
Yes.
And the people are reacting to it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
To Vince, everything is just, to me, a show. Here we go. Here comes the shows in town. Here we go. And I got this character is a man Mountain Mike, and this guy's this and that. And, he did that for marketing reasons, and market those individuals that way. So I'm very confident with what Triple H has going in The Rock, that the WWE is going to be, I don't know how anybody else, nobody can compete with them, really.
A fan is asking, yes, sir. Didka89 is saying, hey, Greg, Dr. D. David Schultz, I guess he said some unflattering.
I lost you again.
Can you hear me now?
I can't hear you.
You got me now? No? We'll get you back
Get
in.
out.
Can you hear me now? I can hear you. No?
You can hear me. I can't hear you.
Okay, we'll please come back in.
I'm hitting all the buttons. So I'll go back out. Hang on.
Yes, sir. No problem. Just about to ask your question, Ditka89. We'll get Greg back to close out the interview. He's been very generous with his time, and appreciate it.
Now you're back.
Okay, you got me now?
Yeah, I got you now.
Perfect. Ditka89 is asking about Dr. D. David Schultz, who I guess said that, some unflattering things about you in terms of the most candy ass wrestler ever got a push. I've never heard of this before, but he's saying, do you care to comment?
I never heard that before.
Do you remember working with him in the AWA? Or
I know when he was there, I didn't really work with him much. He worked with Hogan. It was Hogan's buddy. He brought him in. Mm-hmm. So I didn't really work with David that much. Mm-hmm. I wish I'd known he said that. I saw him last night in where were we? In St. Louis, and I would have
stretched him.
I would have said something to him. Yeah, he liked to fight. He was a tough knuckle.
Yeah, absolutely interesting. Wanted to ask you about your dad getting inducted into the Hall of Fame in 2006. Was that a gratifying or a bittersweet moment, considering what Vince did to the AWA?
Oh man, I've never looked at it that way. I mean, he was inducted into their Hall of Fame. He was getting to a point where he had the Alzheimer's, and it was nice that they honored him that way. But again, it's all political, and it's all for Vince. You know that here. You know, no matter what I did, Vern here, I'm. You know, I mean that's just the way he was.
Mm-hmm.
It had to be good for Vince.
Mm-hmm.
And it probably was, but it was also good for Vern. It was nice of them to put him in there.
Mm-hmm. What when you talk to old school fans and hear about, you know, all the fond memories that we have for the AWA, what do you think the lasting legacy of the AWA is on the business globally and historically in particular?
Well, you know, I go back right now. I'm partners at a company called Powertown, and Steve Rosenthal, who did our Remco toys back years ago, called me up one day. He says, "You want to get back in the doll business, the action figures?" And I said, "Well, you know, everybody's been pretty well exposed." I said, "The only way I would do it is I would like to represent the people that built this industry." You know, 1950, when wrestling came on TV, and the names I mentioned before, Lou Thez, Killer Kowalski, Yukon Eric, Hans Schmidt, Hardbolt Haggerty, Wilbur Snyder, Dick the Bruiser. Let's start in the 50s and build the story of how wrestling got going and the stars that made it. In our first run, we did Vern and Lou Thez from the 50s. We did Hanson and Brody, and we did Magnum TA and Kerry Von Erich. We had great success with it. They're very expensive for us to make. Each mold costs us $27,000. But so what I did, my job was to get talent. We've got 247 signed that now we have to create merchandise for all of them, and that's what we're working on. And it'll be a whole different line. We've got the Remco line, and that we're trying to get where every month we've got new stuff coming out. And we'll see. We're putting it together and working hard at it. And Magnum TA is a good partner, and he does a fantastic job. And so does Steve Rosenthal and the two people that make these. I can't say their names because they work for another company and they do this on the side. But they are outstanding figures if you've seen them. So, you know, that's the direction I want to take it. I want to represent the people that build this industry. You know, Vince McMahon has taken it to a new level. But where was he at the beginning? He wasn't with those guys. You know, his whole philosophy didn't work with what the 50s projected and how it evolved from there. So men, women, little people, referees, promoters, we've got them all on board. And we're going to do a great job. And in fact, anybody out there, if you go to our website, powertownwrestling.com, we just did a great 4 figures for TNA, and they're selling like hotcakes. And we got our next run coming out. It's going to be really good. And the one after that, going to blow you out of the water. I can't say anything about that one.
So just one more time, aside from the website, could you say the website again? And where can the fans? Do you have any other presence on social media or whatnot that the fans?
We try to do Instagram and Facebook. You can find us. TA and I have a podcast. It's Magnum. This the boss, Magnum TA and Greg Gagne, and we are on the 4 Horsemen Network. And you can find us there. Our social media is, but it's PowertownWrestling.com.
PowertownWrestling.com.
To find out what we're doing and where we're going with it.
Well, we'll make sure to put the link to.
God damn it! I lost you again. Yeah.
Oh well. We'll kick you one more time and then bring you back. This technical difficulties notwithstanding, an extremely enjoyable interview with Greg, and I know there's a lot of collectors out there. I've seen some of these initial figures, and they're just excellent. I would recommend that everyone go to the website. We'll have the link in the description for this video. Hopefully, there he is back.
Oh my God!
There we go. We're back. I was just telling
It's
the
gonna be the
fans.
longest hour you've ever had with all this.
No. I want to thank you, Greg, for your time. I was just telling the fans we'll put the link to the website in the description for this video, and be sure to check that out. I really appreciate your time today. It's been fascinating. We'll keep in touch and hopefully do this again, sir.
Well, Noah, thank you very much for taking the time with me. And again, PowertownWrestling.com, and also Magnum TA and Greg Gagne, the boss, Magnum TA and Greg Gagne podcast on the Four Horsemen Network. Thanks, Noah. I appreciate it.
Excellent. Well,
I hope we did okay.
No, that's tremendous. We have technical difficulties and it's live, but it was an excellent conversation. Again, I appreciate your time.
All right, buddy. Take care and let me know how it goes for you.
Take care.
All right.
Fans, that's it for this edition of the Great North Wrestling Podcast. If you haven't already, please subscribe to thehannibaltv.com, like these videos, and you'll keep on top of all the great content we have coming for you. Take care, everybody.
Thank you for watching The Hannibal TV. Please help me out and like this video, then click the subscribe and get notifications buttons so you don't miss any of my latest shoot interviews, match videos, or news updates. Follow us on Facebook at The